Okay, today we'll move to frequency tables and histograms, chapter 11, section 3. Starting with frequency tables. When we think of the word frequency, what do you think? If you have to eat something frequently, what does that mean? It's kind of related to that, isn't it? Hannah? Consistently? Consistently? Or Liam? Often? So frequency is like how often? How often is something taking place? So a table is simply something that holds data in usually number form, right? We use frequency tables for number data, numerical data, not for individual categories, like separate categories as we saw with bar graphs or circle graphs. Lots of different categories there. Here we usually have one kind of thing, one category, and then there's like variations within that category. We divide the data, the numbers, into equal intervals. That's the key today, making sure we know how to divide data into equal intervals, as you did on question 5 of the assignment. Those of you who chose B chose correctly. You don't need to write this next thing down. I want to look at an example as a group, and then we'll do one together. Okay? So, here we have an example that you can see in your textbook in 11.3 on roller coasters. And what they did was they surveyed roller coasters across the world or whatever, and they found different heights. So they said, let's compare roller coasters based on heights. So they put it into a table, and look at that. A table can give you information quickly, right? So where are the greatest, how high are the greatest, what is the interval where roller coasters fall most frequently? Can you see it from where you are, Lauren?
60, 69.9.
And this is in meters. It says in this little red right here, it says meters. So it seems like the majority of the roller coasters, most often they fall in what they have shown here as the shortest interval. Now they could have shown a shorter interval, right? Do you think there are roller coasters less than 60 meters high?
Yes.
Have you ever been to like a little church fiesta or whatever, and they'll have a little one, you know, that's even less. But for what they were gathering, this data, that's the smallest, those are the smallest, okay? There were 13 there. And then we can kind of analyze the data, looking at the numbers and looking at, you know, the tallies and all of that. But another way to look at this is in the histogram itself. And the histogram is here. Now, isn't that an easy way to look at the data? It displays what we just saw in the frequency table, but now in a graph. But how is this different than a bar graph? Wesley, the bars may touch here, right? And the bar graphs don't have touching bars. They're totally separate categories of things. So a bar graph in this, you know, wouldn't be used here, but I could come up with a scenario where we could use a bar graph. Let's say you surveyed Knott's Berry Farm, and you just looked at types of rides or something. You could have roller coasters, and you could have, I don't know, what other types of rides do they have? Dropping things? They have those dropping things, like the Supreme Scream,
I
you know?
love that thing.
And you could do a survey with different things, right? But this is just one topic, one category of roller coasters, and their heights, that's it. And here are these different heights. Why do I see a gap here? I thought there were supposed to be no gaps in histograms. Do you know why, Emily?
Because there were no data in
Very true. So there was just no roller coaster that they surveyed falling in this height range of 80 to 89.9. See that? And there was no roller coaster in their survey that was from 100 meters to 109.9. So the size of these intervals are groups of what? How would you describe those intervals? Dylan? 10. They're groups of 10. And we can really see that by looking at the first number in the little interval. 60 goes then to 70, goes to 80, and so on, right? So we have intervals of 10. Now, could they have chosen a different interval to use? I mean, they could have chosen, like we were saying, 1, right? But that would be kind of ridiculously huge. And they could choose intervals of imagine if they went 100 meters, like 60, and the next interval started at 160. All of these roller coasters would fall in the first interval, right? So it would be kind of useless too. So you want your intervals, number 1, they must be equal. So you may also have gaps the way this one has. But number two, you want them to be able to display the data in a way that you really can gather interesting information from it. So we're going to use this same data, and we're going to make a histogram with different intervals than this. And then we'll compare it to this, okay? And then you have your assignment. So here's the data, and you can find this data in your book if you want. You need to write these numbers down so you can use them. This is on page 643. We're using the data, but we're going to set it up in a different frequency table and make a different histogram. So pause the video and take down the data. Okay, so they've asked us to put this data into a frequency table and histogram that shows 6 intervals total. If we look back here, how many intervals were shown in this histogram? 5, 6, 7. Do you see that? 7 different intervals. So we're not going to use this. We're going to create our own. We need 6 total intervals. So in order to make sure we have all of the data visible in our table, we need to look at the smallest and largest piece of data, don't we? Make sure that they get into our table and histogram. So can anyone identify the smallest piece of data, the smallest number there? Ryan?
61.9.
There it is. Okay. He says 61.9. And then the largest, the highest roller coaster, do you see it? Which one is it? Nick? No, bigger. Bigger than 115? Here it is, here. Good. 126.5. Okay, so we want to make sure that our table has these 2 values for sure in it. So what can we do with that information? 126.5. Chris?
Separate them into different categories, like do 61.9.
You could, but let's find the R. What is the R thing that we're finding? Say it? Range. We're going to find the range. How wide is this data? And so we simply subtract, right? Borrow. What do we get? 15 minus 9?
6.
6? 5 minus 1?
4.
And then 12 minus 6.
6.
So the whole range of the data is 64.6. Really a little single point there. You can see why they use an interval of 10 in their table, right? Because 10 groups of 10 is 70. Do you see that? That worked out nicely for them. But we are supposed to divide this into 6 groups. So let's make our table. Let's see. We've got intervals. We're going to have tallies and totals. Where do you think we might start? What would be a good starting number to use here? Emily?
60.
60, okay. And now we're going to take this number, 64.6, and what could we do with it if we're trying to, huh? Oh. If we're trying to chop it into 6 intervals, what could we do with it? We could round it to what? She's saying 65, okay. And if we're trying to divide it into 6 intervals, what could we do?
Divided by 6.
We could divide by 6, right? About how many times would 6 go into 65? Almost what?
11.
11 times, right? So could we have intervals of 11? Is that an easy number to work with, 11? Not really. 10 we know isn't going to be enough, is it? If we start at 60? 12, is that an easier number? The other class chose something else. Can anybody guess? They chose 15. Why do you think they chose 15? It ends in 5, and then the next interval would end in 0, right? You want to do that too? It's kind of interesting. Okay, so here's a trick to creating your intervals. We want to go from 60 to something, right? And the next interval will be, that's great. The next interval will start at, what is 60 plus 15? 75. Okay, so that interval, if we're going to end it in the 10th place, would have ended at not 60 at all, at 74 point what? 0.9. So the point 9 part sometimes confuses people, but if you just look at the first number of each interval, you can see we've spread this 15 apart, right? What is 75 plus 15?
90.
Good, 90, and 90 plus 15?
105.
You guys are quiet. 105 plus 15?
120.
120, and do we have 6 intervals? Oh, we need one more. So 120 plus 15?
135.
135. Now let's finish by saying where these intervals end. They end just before the next one begins, right? So, who can tell me where the second interval ends? We go from 75 to what, Rachel?
89.9.
Good. Right before 90. See that? And then we go from 90 to what? Juliana, where do we go? Just before 105 would be 104 point what? Good. Okay. And we go from 105 to just before 120. Liam, what would that be?
104.9.
We already got that one. We're looking at the next interval.
119.9.
0.9. Good. And then from 120 to just before 135. Where is that? Faith?
134.9.
Good. And this last one might be the hardest one because we didn't take it any further, right? So what is this last interval? Where is it ending? Nick? 149.9, because 150 would be 15 away from 135. Okay, we chose intervals of 15. Okay, now you need to go through your list and be a really good accountant here. We're going to start at the first roller coaster, 66.4. It falls into this first interval. And just make a tally of what you find. 94.5 would fall in the third interval. And account for each roller coaster across the middle. Okay, so when we add up the first interval, how many tallies do we have? Say it. 16. The second interval. Third interval.
2.
And then we have 1, and the last interval, there was nothing in it. Interesting. Okay, we're now going to change this to a histogram. As interesting as this is, it's a lot easier to read when it's in a picture, like a histogram, right? So let's go to that. I'm going to start by putting a table for, a title. Heights of roller coasters. Labels, right? We've already chosen our intervals down here. And they are the heights. We have the heights down here. We started with 60, right? We went 60 to 74.9. The second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth. I'm just making sure I have 6 intervals visible here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, okay? And then we went from 75 to whatever, 90, 105, 120, 135. And then I can go back in and fill in where they went to 89.9, 104.9, 119.9. Okay, and then what do we have on the y-axis?
15.
We have the what? Good. So we're showing the frequency of roller coasters, which is also the number of roller coasters. And what was the greatest, the interval with the greatest number was what? What was that number? That was 16, right? And so we might just make this as high as 16. If you split it in half, you'd have 8. Okay, and now we simply draw the bars, which I'm going to pause the video to do. Okay, so here's our histogram, and it has the same data that this histogram has. So which of these do you prefer? Do you like ours? Who likes ours? Who likes this one better? It has a little more detail, so you might like it better. Okay, here you go. Have fun.